All right, welcome everybody. We have a themed meeting today. So a topic that I've certainly been interested in, all of our speakers have been interested, is resilience. And that can cover a lot of ground. That can mean making sure you've hardened your server, doing what you can to prevent hackers from causing trouble to your life, but also, it gets into DevOps and making sure you can bring your systems back up, patching your systems, disaster recovery, business continuity. So we have a whole collection of presentations today that speak to that. And our first speaker, Duane Maas, is actually taking a very narrow window of opportunity over his lunch hour while he's teaching a class. He started teaching this morning, he's taking a break doing this, and then teaching this afternoon. So I don't want to hold him up any more than I have to. So without further ado, Duane Maas is going to be speaking about automating the creation of immutable backups on macOS. And I'll bet he will even explain what immutable backups are. Go, Duane.
Okay. When you have a database, and we all have, FileMaker running on servers. I don't think many of us are running peer-to-peer. I don't even think that works anymore. But since servers now are so susceptible to ransomware of various means, what we wanted to do, we host quite a bit. We have our own data center, and we host, I think we're close to 100 now FileMaker databases up there for different companies. And so we wanted to get a system where I could sleep a little better at night. We could all sleep a little better at night, and protect it so you know that you're not going to get your media, so it isn't recoverable. So when you talk about backup, as soon as you want to have, they call it the 3-2-1 backup system. And it's basically 3 copies of your data. That's the original data, and then 2 backup copies and 2 different storage types. So what you want to have is you can have your one running on your server that you're running on, and then the second one on an external hard drive or a different, and then the one copy should always be offsite, someplace where it's stored offsite in a different location than the original media. The problem is how to get that there. And there's lots of systems like Datto and Prestore and things like that that'll move it to a different location. But we wanted another way to do that. I mean, we keep snapshots of all the VMs and things like that. But I thought, well, I always think a little differently. So I came up with a little different system that I'll explain to you. So FileMaker takes care of the 2 copies. You could say the original data is the live database, and the second copy is FileMaker Server backup on a separate drive. So what we want to do is get a copy to a remote server. So the first thing that I do is create a backup script that backs up to a hidden folder. And I can do that on either Linux or the Mac. A hidden folder would be something that has a dot in front of it. And I've tried about 20 different versions of ransomware on my little isolated VM, and none of them wrote to that dot folder. On Windows, you don't have that opportunity. There are protected folders, but we'll talk about that a little later. So I want to get it so that the remote system that the ransomware can't find. So I don't want to get it where I'm mounting a share or something like that. So there's any evidence of how I'm copying that off of there. So the first thing I want to do is write the backups to a hidden directory. And if you look at this, I've got the regular backups directory that FileMaker uses, but I also created another backup folder with .backups. And I've got a video right after this where, I'll pause it in the middle of it. I'm pretty sure I can pause it and show you how that's done. So here's the little video. I hope this shows up well enough over the Zoom. So the first thing I do is go in and I'm going to list the contents of the directory. So you can see I don't have any folder in there that's called backup. And here's the Finder representation of that. So you can see there's nothing there that looks like that. But if I go in and run the command ls-la, notice there's the .backups folder. And this is something that, like I said, I've tried, I think about 20 different types of ransomware. I got tired of going and downloading ransomware because I was afraid it might get loose. It didn't look for dot folders at all. It just, just used the regular structure, file structure. And if you look at this, this is the same directory in the Finder, and it isn't listed there. But if I go in now and rename that folder to backups by using the move command, so I'm going to, and then I'm going to rename it backups. And if you look on the right side, that folder shows up, and you can see inside there, I've got the backups that I've created. Then if I go back and list it, it also shows up in the directory listing. So this is, and then if I go in and change the name back to .backups again, it disappears. So it's kind of, we're doing some of this just to kind of protect, it gives the ransomware authors one more place that they have to figure out. And, they always say, why do robbers rob banks? That's where the money is. If you can make it a little more difficult for them to get to, they'd rather go collect more money from people that are easier to get to. The next thing I do is, because I'm going to use rsync, I don't want to put any passwords in the system so that somebody could grab a password and stuff like that. And if you've used SSH, you can create a key pair so you don't need a password to get into the system. So it's kind of like you have an authenticated user that can get to the server. So you use SSH keygen. It's a pretty simple command, and SSH copy ID. You're going to copy it to the remote host. So let me show you a little video here how this works. The first thing I'm going to do is create a key. I guess I got to start the video. So I'm going to start. You're going to see if I try to SSH to this remote server, it asks me for a password. This is standard SSH, and I can log in and get to that remote server. But now what I can do is do SSH keygen, and what this does is creates a public and private key pair. And I'm putting it in my SSH folder, and you can see that it was created for me. So if you're familiar with encryption, the public-private key is very common, that your server will have a private key, and then what you do is get issued a public key to that remote system, and they can get into it. Now, the key is you don't want to give that private or that public key to any of the ransomware people and stuff like that, but there's other ways we protect against that. But this way, I can transfer files with rsync without having to have a login password stored in the script. So now, if we go in and use keygen, we're going to copy that key to the remote system. And what it does on this, it puts the key in there, and then it adds the key to the system. And basically here it says log into the machine. And notice I won't be required to add a password. I am required to use dots in the IP address instead of commas, and I'm just logged in there automatically. I don't need a password. Oh, I'm starting this again, sorry. Oh, they started the video again, sorry about that. So the next thing I'm going to do is going to create a backup schedule in the server to back up files to the hidden directory. And this is pretty normal FileMaker backup. Sorry for the small print, but if you look here, and I don't know if zooming well, yeah, I've got that. I'm writing it to a temp folder and I'm just putting it in .backups. This could be in any folder that you want, but the key is you want to have this in a hidden folder. And I can do this currently on Linux and the Mac. On Windows, I'm still experimenting around with that, the protected folders, but we'll talk about that at the wrap up. So now I want to create a backup script. And rsync is a wonderful program that will copy files that haven't been copied before. And it will copy it from this backups folder to the remote folder. What's nice about this is, again, this is a simple script, a command line script or a bash script that can be called from a FileMaker script. And we'll look at that in a little bit. So if I have this script, and this is really quick, I'm just going to run it when I was testing it, and it copied those files. You can see from the remote backup files over to my other system, my remote system. So then all I have to do is get a FileMaker script to execute the bash command. If you notice, there's a command perform apple script, and that does a do shell script. And this file is basically, it's that one-line bash script that I've got there. So it's a very simple one. The script is right there, you know, just rsync -av and then give you what's there. So the final steps are to put the FileMaker file with the script on the server, and then set up a schedule to run the script after the daily remote backup. Now, this is something that is pretty simple. The one thing is that you should know is when you put the FileMaker file with the script on the server, you've got to make sure it can find that script when it's on the server, because we've been running this remote to test. And as soon as you put it up there, you're going to have to relocate that bash script to, you know, a directory that the server can get to. So it's a, you know, that's one fly in the ointment. So if we look at this running from beginning to end, I'm going to run the script here in the server. So it's backing up the databases there. And after the databases are backed up, and obviously you could do this nightly or something like that, I just have, if you look at this, sorry. So this is the backup script, the backup schedule. And then the second thing is, if you look, this is the, I'm signed into the remote machine there with just SSH there, but you can see what's in the folder right now. In the backups folder, that has been backed up, it's got these remote backups here. So then what I do is run the script. And this is the remote machine. When I run the script then, it's very quick. And then if I do a listing, you can see that it copied the other backups down there. So this is remote. I didn't make any connections. I just did a copy to it. So this could be to any server. And it just works, you know, so I've got these copies of the files. I have written scripts where, you know, more educated bash scripts. So I just copy basically when I know, like, this was backed up April 13th at 9 o'clock. So I can make the script so it tells it exactly what folders to back up, works very well, and then goes from there. So other notes, what I've started to do for our Linux servers, because Linux, I haven't found a command that'll let me run a bash script on a Linux server. So what I'm doing now is you can run the rsync script, you just write it backwards. So it's actually pulling the backups from the Linux server to a remote server instead of pushing them, if that makes sense. So I've got, we've just got a Mac Mini with about 5 terabytes of storage on it. And we just go out to all these different servers and pull the data in with, you know, kind of like a reverse rsync. It just means we have to change the private keys around a little bit. The other thing is for Windows, it works. Like I said, I'm still messing around with protected folders with that. But you have to install rsync on the server, which takes a while the first time, but once you get it down, it works. And that's something you can do. As I mentioned, there's no hidden folders on Windows that really work like the Unix does. So we're playing around with using protected folders, but I haven't gone in to see if ransomware can figure out how to write to a protected folder. And then going forward, we'd probably, well, we've already changed it on a couple, changed the SSH port from the default 22 to 2222 or something else, just so you don't see SSH being open there. That's another way. This is kind of like security by obscurity. So any questions on that? Pretty short, but there's a couple complex things there. You have to do the keys, you have to work with hidden folders, and then it's messing around. But once you get the privilege or the keys set and the backups, and it actually works very well. And we've got a FileMaker database. We just put in the address of the database, and then it goes out and gets the data from there.
Lynn, did you have a question?
Yes. Does any of this work with like third-party backup facilities, you know, utilities like Dropbox or anything like that?
Well,
CrashPlan.
Well, if you wanted to do CrashPlan, what I would do is grab the data, put it in a computer, and you could take that data and put it in Dropbox or put it in a folder that's backed up by CrashPlan. This is the main deal of this is, obviously, if you had Dropbox on your FileMaker server, that used to be a pretty decent way to do it, you know, say sync your backup folders. But the problem is, if they encrypt the stuff that's in the backup folders, you're getting, you know, encrypted folders on your Dropbox too. Does that make sense?
Yes. Would just having remote cloud storage not cover the...
Like I said, remote cloud storage is good, but the problem is if they start to encrypt it, then you're then the remote cloud storage is, you're going to get encrypted files up there too.
Oh, I see. So they could, okay.
You do have the advantage of the remote cloud storage. The previous stuff, when something gets encrypted, it isn't named .fmp anymore. It's every place uses a different 3-letter acronym, or different trailing stuff. So you might have some old backups, but what I'm doing on this is I'm grabbing the backups pretty much an hour after they're written, so that theoretically they wouldn't have time to encrypt it, and I'm getting them to a safe place. That's my theory. But I'm not going to advertise it and have people try to break it. So
Duane,
right.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
After you. You're not going to go, huh? Okay. Duane, on the one slide, you showed that you were calling AppleScript to actually execute your shell script. What would you use in place of that on a Linux server?
I can't. That's why I do it backwards. When we started to host Linux server, I changed it around, because rsync can go either way. It can either do a push or a pull.
Months ago, you and I had a conversation where you talked about having FileMaker export the shell script and then running it and then deleting it. I have dabbled with that approach, but I have trouble getting the shell script to become executable without doing something else.
Yeah, and you typically, I've gotten more dependent on Bash for it, and just figure if the shell script, and this is what I'm starting to do now, is have everything on, like I said, we've got a Mac Mini, which, basically is our backup device in our office, and that just pulls stuff from other servers. That seems to work a little bit better as I've worked through it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And what I'm doing now is starting to play around putting variables in the shell script. So in the Bash script, use AppleScript to push a variable to it, and then back up a different machine.
Right. I've put like little, I don't know what to call them, guinea pig scripts out there that says, hey, go find this file of this name and make it executable. And then the file's not there. I poop it out in FileMaker, and then I execute that guinea pig shell script that says, hey, go turn that into an executable and then run it. So I can
the trouble is you typically have to use a sudo on that. So it gets more complex. I can do that with Jamf.
All right. So good stuff, man. Saw a lot of cool things in that presentation. Thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, the big thing is, and it's really weird, the SSH key pair is so easy on the Mac, and you look at these people that put up, if you Google, there's all these long explanations of how to do it and stuff like that. And I just run those 2 commands, and that puts in the public key on the remote system, so you can do it. It just works out really well. You don't have to know much about the encryption and the keys. It just creates them automatically and goes from there. So look at the video of how I generated the keys. That's probably the most difficult part on that, because when you do that, you don't have to put any passwords into the Bash script for it to run.
Nice.
Hey, Duane.
Yeah.
Is that the part that's creating a secure connection between 2 computers, or is that the part that's making the backups immutable?
That's the part that's making the secure connections between the 2 computers. My goal with this, to make it immutable, is to make it so there's a temporary connection between the 2 computers, just to copy the files, and then it's broken again. Because that's the problem with ransomware. People will mount a server and copy the files up there, and as soon as they mount the server, then ransomware gets over to that volume and starts encrypting that.
Right. But isn't the nature of the immutable backups that even if they're found, the files can't be changed?
Well, I could lock them up on that Mac Mini. I could run a bash script there and just lock the files there so they couldn't be changed. My big deal is getting them over there without having ransomware find it. But what I could do is run that bash script and add a last deal to chmod it so they can't be written to.
Gotcha. Thank you.
John, did you have a question? All right, last call on the questions.
Yeah, I'm just looking for people to punch holes in this because I want to know where I'm screwing up and fix that part.
Hey, can I jump in? Launch D on the macOS. You can run a shell script from Launch D, and you can run it headless. And much as I love AppleScript, terrific. You kind of take FileMaker out of the picture there, so that if something goes wonky with whatever the process is that runs the FileMaker scripting, whatever in the server, Launch D, because it's OS, it's kind of rock solid.
Yeah, I used to use Launch D for it. What happened was when we started to back up multiple servers, I can kind of make a dashboard for that and put in the IP address or DNS name for that server, and then it substitutes that in the bash script and goes. So Launch D will run one bash script, but it won't run multiple. Well, you'd have to go in and edit it. It's a lot easier to edit and put in the backup if you have a FileMaker script.
Yeah, I mean, I think the FileMaker is certainly easier for sure, because the Launch D, I'm looking at some of them here. It's, you got a plist, you got a shell script, you got to like do some command lines to load and unload and so forth and so on.
Well, Launch D has, what the script name is and what time you execute it. It's basically like a cron.
Yeah. Jump into a different topic. I really like the thing you were saying about the, multiple backups, multiple places. We actually had a client who said, can we be on more than one cloud? So we actually are pulling an offsite to our location. And, we're in a metro area. So like, we lost our 10 gigabyte file. So we're not pulling it down super duper duper slow from S3, let's say. We're like, hey, send someone in a cab. We got a hard drive, come pick it up. So that's kind of one thing that we've thrown into the mix. I like 2 hard drives. Oh, the other thing and final comment here is S3. I believe that they have a mutable storage option. I don't think we played with it, and I could be wrong. I seem to remember from a previous presentation that you can, using S3 command line or whatever API, you can push a backup to S3 and define it to be immutable. But I don't know. Someone else could confirm if that's true or just something that I imagined. Yeah. Anyway, thank you. Hey, Duane, thanks a lot. I really like your presentations. I appreciate it.
Yeah, as far as the immutable part of that, you can make it the file so it's read only, and then secondly, you can set the lock flag on it too. So that means that unless the guy can get into it and do a sudo and unlock it and chmod it, then it's basically stuck there. So
I like that, chmod it. Gotta write that down.
All right, let's wrap it here. We gotta move on to Micah, but thanks a ton, Duane. That was great. And enjoy the rest of your training session this afternoon.
Yeah, I got 20 minutes and then they're back from lunch.
Maybe you can get a bite to eat.
Yeah.
Thanks, Duane.
Yep. Bye.
All right. Next up is Micah Woods. Just a few weeks ago, he came up with a very cool new innovation about patching custom functions using add-ons, which is a unique sort of repurposing of that capability. So here to talk more about it is Micah.
All right. Thanks, Chris. All right. So I kind of stumbled across this a little bit on accident. I don't know about you guys, but I kind of have a list of things that are like on my someday list where, if you have time, you'd like to look at it. And the whole patching thing was on my list for a long time, and I finally had a chance to take a look at it. You know, we do a fair amount of PHP development, and we use we use Git for version control, and we live and die by it. I mean, it's just like, it took us a while to get up to speed on the whole thing and to really get the hang of it. But once you get the hang of it, you absolutely love it and wouldn't want to live without it. So I have yet to see really a compelling solution to use version control with FileMaker. And I don't have a super compelling solution yet. I mean, this is a work in progress. One of the things I wanted to say is that, if you are one of the 3 people maybe that are using version control in FileMaker, please reach out. I'm certainly interested in collaborating on this. And I thought I'd talk a little bit about, why I went down this rabbit hole in the first place. I have a pretty extensive set of custom functions that I use, and got a couple of really nice ones that I just did fairly recently, this array sorting and this JSON to expression. I would like to be able to share these, and I know there are ways like Brian Dunning's site that I could put these up on, but I really wanted to come out with a better way to share a library of custom functions. So that was kind of my motivation, and I'll just promote this little JSON to expression one a little bit. If you're ever working with web services and maybe you get a snippet of an example of the JSON that you need to provide, you can send that JSON to this function and it'll give you back an expression. So just promoting that little custom function a little bit. I think there's a couple others that do something similar, but that one I wrestled with for a long time, and it would be nice to get it out there in the community. So with no further ado, I will jump into a demo and show you how the add-ons work with basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to use an add-on to install a custom function library. And it's super, super simple. I go to my add-ons tab here in layout mode. I find my add-on, and that's it. Boom. So I go to my custom functions, and you can see that there they are. So the next thing I want to do is I'm going to write a real quick script and show some dialogue, just something real simple. I have my little scratch pad here. This is what I want the script to show you. I'll save that, and then I will demo this awesome script. So you can see there, it's using those 4 custom functions, and they came in. And this is kind of just for demo purposes. These aren't useful custom functions at all, but I think most people probably rely on custom functions. I mean, custom functions provide tremendous value to the whole platform. So people use them a lot. And let's kind of get in the time machine now and pretend we're fast forwarding 6 months or a year. And let's say there's been some updates to those custom functions, to that library. So what I do is I just drop into layout mode, and I find my V2. I put that in there, and literally that's it. So I go back to browse mode, run my script again, and my custom functions are all updated. So there's my version 1. You can see that now I'm on version 2, and it's got a different release date. So to me, I was like, wow, that is pretty amazing. I could deploy my custom functions that way. Discard those changes. One of the things I can also do, which is pretty interesting, is now that I'm on V2, to kind of keep my solution clean, I can go in here and uninstall V1. One of the interesting things that I found with this is that when I put V2 in place, it has these, UUIDs behind the scenes, and it actually becomes like the owner of those custom functions. So deleting this is fine. Go back to browse mode. I'll look at my script. You can see that my script is still intact. If I run it, I can show you that it's still intact. So my custom functions are still there. But now I want to talk a little bit about the downside of this, this whole thing. Let's say that we get back in the time machine, and now let's say it's another 6 months, and there's a new developer on the project. And the developer's looking at this going, you know, I have no idea what that does. I don't like it. I'm going to get rid of it. So you uninstall it, and, you know, all hell breaks loose, because now if I run my script, it's broken. If I look at my script, I can't even tell what the, you know, functions are. And, you know, this problem isn't, it isn't just for add-ons. You know, if you do this to any custom function, if you go in and delete a custom function, I mean, you can really mess up your solution. So I think that's kind of the downside to this, is that you end up with an add-on in your solution, and you have to understand what that add-on is doing. I think that's probably true for any add-on, really. You know, you have to understand what it does, and you have to understand what the implications are if you were to uninstall it. So talk a little bit about the pros and cons. The add-ons, like I showed you, super easy to install. And you can install them on hosted files. I'm sure people are doing this probably all the time. I'd say that last one can also be kind of a con, because uninstalling it on a hosted file, I would say it's not best practice. Even if you have a really good idea of what it's doing, maybe if you just install it and then you're just taking it right back out because you don't want to use it, you're trying it, maybe that's okay. I don't know, but probably better to do this on a local file. I'll get into the FM upgrade tool a little bit. And I'm pretty sure that the FM upgrade tool uses the same underlying technology or the same code base that's being used for add-ons, because the XML file that you need to use to create a patch to use with FM upgrade tool is very similar to, you know, it's basically the same as what you use for an add-on. One of the differences is, though, that the add-ons only support adding. I mean, it's literally called an add-on, so you can only add. If you try to send the delete command or replace action to using an add-on, it just won't work. I mentioned this; it's a bit of a black box, difficult to figure out, you know, what's in that add-on. And again, you could have major problems if you uninstall that. So, Chris, I might stop for a second to see if there's any questions about like the add-on approach, or, you know, what I've done here so far.
Micah, can you just reinstall the add-in to return it back to working order?
No, that's a good question. I think if I went back here and drop back into layout mode, and I mean, I can try I'll put one in first. Yeah, my script is done. My reference to it is gone. So yeah, you know, that's really true for anything. If you delete something, you can't go back, you know.
Unless you're going to a backup.
Yeah, that is kind of one of the big points here, is that I think if you're uninstalling add-ons, I think best practice is to do it on a local file. Make sure that after you uninstall it, you know, it doesn't have unintended consequences.
Question, Micah.
Hey, Vince. Yep.
Hey, if you update the add-ons and the calculation result is going to be different, those stored calculations would have to be revisited. Is that correct?
No, it updates the calculations.
Even on stored calcs?
On stored, that's a good point. Yeah. I mean, you know, I've always wondered about what's the difference between an auto enter calculation and a calculation field. And I think that they're exactly the same in regards to indexing. So you're right. If it was an unstored calc, though, it would reevaluate at run.
Yeah. Unstored would reevaluate at viewing it, or at you know, when it's referenced. However, the stored calcs would have to get re-updated. Re-triggered.
Yeah, and that's that. And I guess I would also say that if you make a change to a custom function that's used in a stored calc, not using add-ons, just using the normal way that you would do it, then you'd still have that consideration, right?
Yeah, exactly. But it's good to point out. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely.
Micah, in the case of your script, where as soon as the referenced objects disappeared, it just sort of imploded. If you were to use something like evaluate and just put strings in there to reference the object, they can sort of come and go, and it'll either fail if they're gone, or it'll evaluate to something if something's there. And that, it's kludgy, it's super specific, but a little bit of a workaround.
Yeah, another thing I thought about, I've already put those back in. So if I look at my custom function, I've got this version custom function, and I've thought about putting a manifest in here so that you could always look at this, and not only could you get the version, but you could also know what else is included. I also have a very specific prefix, the idea being there that this library, this is like the strut custom function library. So you don't want to have a naming conflict with other custom functions that people are using. So those are a couple of the kind of the workarounds that I've thought of so far regarding, what you might do.
Right. And you would probably also want to list dependencies in there if you had function A calling function B as part of its operation.
Dependencies are a huge, part of this. My thinking is that if you release a library, it has to be fully independent. It can't have any external dependencies. You'd want to put it in place and have everything there. That becomes a bit of a shame because, you might have a library that does JSON functions, and you might have another library that builds, curl, requests. And, there's a reasonable chance that you want to share some of the custom functions. So that could be, definitely a downside.
In the comments in the chat, we've had some excellent comments, particularly from Chiyoko, who just talked about that very issue. So Chiyoko, you want to jump in?
Hi there. Yes. So I'm working on a tool with Matt Petrowski that works with the FileMaker clipboard to load XML. And we'll have a feature there for you to load from a repository. It could be a directory on your network, or it could be from a GitHub repository. So that might be a way to pull in a library. But of course, it's not going to deal with this versioning of like what's happening with the add-ons, having that UUID, and the downside of blowing that out, if you remove if you delete the add-on, that issue isn't solved with our tool. But it would be a path for sharing code. So it's we're working on it, but it's not out yet. And I'll definitely let everyone know when it's out for sure.
Yeah, I've been working on this, and I like the add-ons. I think it's pretty cool. I could see myself using it, with a really tight library. But I think there are some pretty serious downsides to it as well. So the next thing is, and Chris, do I have till about 15 minutes or?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right, let me switch over to, I wonder in Zoom, can you guys see my Zoom screen, or can you just see my screen?
We're just seeing your regular screen, not Zoom.
Okay, you don't see all your, okay. I don't know if when you're in Zoom, if you can see when you're sharing. All right, let me get back to it. So I'll close out of here, get back to my slideshow, and I will talk a little bit about the FM upgrade tool, because that's actually where I started with this whole thing. And I was looking at the XML for the FM upgrade tool, and I was like, wow, this XML looks exactly like the XML that gets generated when you run the create add-on script. Or step or whatever it is. So then I was like, all right, well, I looked at add-ons, but just to compare these a little bit. So the FM upgrade tool supports add, replace, and delete. And I've had really good luck with add and delete. And I want to like reach out to somebody at FileMaker to see about replace, because I have not had any luck getting objects to replace. Like, it would be nice. One of the examples I'll show, the way that I update a script is I figure out and I do all of this programmatically, by the way. I've written a little FileMaker solution that actually parses the XML and figures all the complicated stuff out for you. But it'll write a set of delete steps. So if your script has like 6 steps in it, it'll start by deleting those 6 steps. And then it'll go to that same exact script and it'll add the steps that you want to put in place, which I bet you everybody here does the same thing. Like if you're working in development on a script, you might have a whip script, like your work in process. And when you get done and it's all tested, it's the way you want it, you select the whole thing, you copy it to your clipboard, you go over to the target script, the one that's going to be replaced, you select all, you delete everything, and then you paste your script into place and you know, check for errors, make sure it all worked right. This kind of does like exactly like that. So anyway, you know, with the FM upgrade tool, you're going to have a local copy. I think that's a pro because it encourages the best practice. The cons, there's a number of problems. You have to install the command line tool. And then you have to be familiar with the command line. Again, what I've done so far, not only does it generate the patch file, but it also generates the command line that you need to run that will create the new version of your file with the patch applied. Technically, this tool, I don't know if it'll ever get out of developer preview. It seems like it's been stuck in developer preview forever. So, you know, I think people are still pretty cautious because it's marked as developer preview. It's only supported on Mac and Windows. And, you know, I'll say that FM data migration gets all the love because, you know, that I think that's become pretty mainstream. I think that, you know, you've got commercial tools now that use it, that make it really easy to use, and it's great. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think FM data migration gets installed by default when you install server. So you kind of like, you know that it's actually going to be there. And it's supported on Linux. So at any rate, since we have a little more time, I'm going to show you what I've done so far. And I'm just going to show you, actually just going to show the kind of the structure of how it's working. What I mean by that is I'm going to open up this folder called repos. And if anyone's worked with Git, they'll be probably familiar with this structure. You know, a Git repository typically will start out with a main branch. And so the idea is that, you know, when I'm starting my solution is called hello, and it has this main branch, and I put my FileMaker file in here. And if I look at this file, it's a super basic file. It doesn't have any scripts in it, except for, well, I did put this one script in it because this is a super handy script to have. It will create do the save as XML, and it'll save it right next to it, meaning it figures out the file path of your file. And for example, if I were to get rid of this file and then run that script, then it just puts that file back in place, which this whole thing that I'm working on here, it all relies on the XML. So you got to have the XML. So that was my, you know, basically when I was initializing this main branch, I would put this in place and then I would commit it. And when I commit it, I create this UUID for the folder that represents that commit. And in this commit, one of the first things I have here is the patch. Since this is an initial commit, this patch really doesn't have anything in it. It doesn't have any delete actions. It doesn't have any add actions. It doesn't have any replace actions. It essentially just takes the file and it runs this command. I'll open up this with BB Edit so you can kind of see it. So this is my this is my command line command, and it figures out, you know, my little tool figures out all the paths. So you need a pass for the source. This is the file that you're starting with. And then you need the patch path. That's where you're going to create, that's where your patch actually exists. And then your destination is where you want your new file to be put. So if I copy that to my clipboard, let me go ahead and delete that file. And then let's see if I run this, hopefully it'll patch. Yep, there it did it. All right, so what happened there was I ran the command, it went and ran this file, it took this patch and it applied it to that file and created this file. So now I've got a committed file, and the idea would be that should not change going forward. One of the things I thought about is creating an MD5 hash of that, so I would actually know if any changes have been made to kind of keep it secure. And I know this is kind of complicated, but now I have a feature branch, and in my feature branch, I have this feature that I wanted to add to my solution. I wanted to be able to ask people to provide a message, and I would put it into the database. And I think that if I look at this, now if I look at this, there's my first version of it. And if I wanted to figure out where this came from, I could look at this commit line, or I'm sorry, I could look at the shell script that basically what it did is it took the initial, I know this gets complicated, but it took the main branch commit and it applied the patch and it generated this file. Let's look at the patch because this will tell a little bit of a story. This is the script that it put in place, and these are all the script steps that it put in place. So that patch took my original file and put these scripts in place, and now I've got a new copy of my file with those in place. If I look at this commit, let's see what I did. I actually added these custom functions first. So I wanted to use a number of custom functions in my solution. So this patch put all these kind of fun little emoji custom functions in place. And this is the catalog section, and this is the actual code section. So again, the solution figured out what the differences were, figured out from FileMaker. This is all parsed out of FileMaker's XML. So it figured out, what do I need to do to patch this file? And once I patch this file, I now have all these custom functions in place. And then the final thing I did with this one was I did an update, because I wasn't happy with this one, because when you ran the script, I could say, okay, and it would still create a record. And I was like, that's stupid. There should be some validation on that. So I created this little branch. And in this second version, or this version, if I run the script, it now has validation, and I added some other things like the use of my emojis and a nice little message. Your message has been saved. So I don't pretend to think that a lot of people will understand exactly what I was just, talking about, but I guess I'd open up for discussion. Chris, does any of that make any sense to you, or is there anybody that it does make sense to?
Yeah, I think it's cool. I think
Yeah.
would be with large files is that you're going to start chewing through the hard drive space, because you have to keep the binary around, right? You're not, you can't sort of have one binary and sort of roll back from that to get to an earlier version, or roll forward to get to.
You could use a clone, and that would help.
Yeah, but even some clones can be pretty large.
Well, and there's also parsing time. Honestly, this is all really kind of hunky dory, because this thing is super. Well, it's 283. It's a tiny file, so it parses really fast because there's not a whole lot of objects in it. So your parsing time, I don't know if people are using like FM perception, and you get a big file in there and it thinks, because it's parsing all that XML.
Yeah.
The one thing I'll say that I really like about it is that this patch, this is what I would put in version control, because this patch becomes, this is the truth. I guess it's kind of together maybe with this, but again, I was thinking about, Git actually maintains a database, and it knows, what's happened with everything. And so I was figuring there needed to be some way to kind of record, to store, where this thing come from. This patch, yeah, you applied this patch to get this file, but which file did you start with? And this file actually does tell you which file you started with.
Yeah, I was just sort of thinking through, in a multi-developer environment, how would you manage that in terms of process? Would you just say, okay, everyone was banging on this today, and at the end of the day, we're going to commit the thing? but that doesn't really memorialize who did what. Whereas if you have a developer, you know, and this works much better in multi-file solutions, if you have a developer sort of check out their piece of work and then do it, and they commit, that memorializes the work that they did. So if there's a problem with it, you can go back to that person. But in a multi-developer environment, I think that becomes a little bit of a challenge to determine authorship.
Well, I mean, if everything went through, if the only way that your production file got updated was by applying patches, then everything would have to go through, you know, some kind of version control. And you know, the idea in the end would be, you know, you'd have some kind of, you know, workflow where your production file would be taken down, the patch would be applied, the new file would be opened. You know, you'd still have to run through testing to make sure it actually works. You know, all your tests work. It's no easy feat. There's no doubt.
Mike?
I think a major problem with versioning in FileMaker in a multi-file solution, you can never be completely sure when you slide that back in there, it's going to connect up properly with the other files in the solution. Even working with a single client, 2 files, one an interface and one a data file, changing out that interface file can be chance to have it reconnect properly with the source file. I've encountered it repeatedly, and having to re-establish connections and relationships and things that don't quite make it. So versioning in that situation would be a little bit iffy, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think the easiest way to do version control, or probably the most, you know, viable way to do it right now, is you just, you know, make all your changes, you know, in a development environment. You create your XML file, and then you put that into version control, and then you use, you know, the FM data migration to, you know, to bring the data in from the old file into the new file. Because then you have the XML, and you can compare that XML, you know, against the previous XML, and that will give you your diff.
I don't know. I don't know about that, especially for really large XML files. I don't know if that would be reliable. On the smaller XML files, it probably is fine. But some XML files are hundreds of megabytes.
Yeah. And parsing it, I mean, I have a pretty big solution that, you know, I've handwritten the parser in FileMaker, you know, for all the XML, and it's nice that it can run on server now. You know, we can do save copy as XML on server now, which is super handy, but I've regularly shut down my server because of it. I mean, luckily it's just a development server, and it's a pretty underpowered little, you know, Linux machine running in the cloud, but it's one of the sure ways actually to crash it is to try to digest the XML. I think there almost needs to be an external service, like there needs to be a web service that you upload your XML file to it, and it, you know, parses it and then sends you back maybe a, you know, CSV file or something like that, that you can, if you want to import it, you can. But the size of the XML files it's a huge problem.
Hey, Micah, this might play right into what you're talking about a web service being available, but the FM upgrade tool, the migrator, that's really only going to exist on a server install. It's not going to exist on a development machine unless you've installed it specifically, or on a user machine or anything like that. Is there any way to run that without running it on a server?
Are you talking about this one, the FM data migration?
Yeah.
That gets installed on the server.
Right. I'm talking about other cases. So you've got a developer with a machine that doesn't have a copy of server installed on it. Can they run that on their machine?
You can download that. I mean, you always used to have to install it yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can run that locally on your machine.
I'm just wondering about you've got commercial like one of Vince's tools, for instance, where there's a copy of it sitting on a user's machine and it's not sitting on a server where these command line things are installed. And would you be able, would this be a viable way to build updaters for customers, not other developers?
Yeah, I mean, kind of like I said in the beginning, is I wanted to share a custom function library, with the community. But the big problem that we all want to solve is like, how do I get these changes that I've made out to my customers, especially if, like, let's say it's a script and it's the script you use for all your curl stuff, and you make an update and it's in 20 systems, at 20 different customers, and it's the same script, and now you've made a change or you fixed a bug. How do you get that change out to all those places?
Right.
That's a good existential place to stop. We're at the end of our time. I want to point out that Rosemary TG posted a link to the FM data migration tool in the chat if anybody wants to grab it so they can be able to download it. Next up is our breakout rooms, and maybe some of you will be lucky enough to get a breakout room with Micah and you can continue the conversation. So I am going to set this for, let's say, 6 minutes. And we'll do, let's say, 3 breakout rooms and let you guys have at it. Go.
Hey, Chris, did you pause recording? Because I just got a mention that recording's in process.
Nope, I did not. Resume. There
There.
we go.
Heidi gets an assist.
Yes. Let's see, Tech News Roundup. This is the April edition. As usual, I just want to give a quick tip of the hat to Gary over at FMBug, who we stole this idea from. And first up, I wanted to wish happy birthday to cell phones. On April 3rd, it was the 50th anniversary of the very first cell phone call, so I thought I'd share that. In other news, apparently a company called Clearview AI scraped 30 billion images from Facebook and has made that repository available to law enforcement everywhere. So anything you posted on Facebook ever is now freely accessible by the cops without a warrant. So use caution. A fun, I don't know if it's a fun story, but some hackers convinced the wife of a Russian war criminal that they were from Russia and wanted a patriotic photo shoot. So they basically got them to do a group photo of everybody who's in the gang and dox themselves. And so now the bad guys are exposed. This third item here I thought was an interesting one, with 1/3 of organizations saying they have covered up the fact that they have been breached. And the article sort of goes on to say that a lot of people in IT roles have been pressured to not do reporting that they might otherwise be obligated to do. And so this is an interesting phenomenon in that, you know, as sort of IT adjacent folks and people who are responsible for FileMaker servers, in many cases, I guess just be ready for this if it ever comes up that you might get squeezed to not do any reporting. So maybe try and front run that a little bit and you know, have some dialogue with the powers that be in your various organizations or organizations that you work with to make sure that everybody's on the same page about how things are going to go in the event of a data breach, so that there's no surprises. You might have a plan of action that you've worked up, like if we get ransomware, here's what we do and here's who gets notified. And if you know, the powers that be don't want some of those notifications to happen, it would be better to know sooner rather than when you're in emergency mode and trying to execute your plan. So just worth thinking about. I thought this was an interesting story. Amazon has banned the Flipper Zero, which is a wireless hacking tool. They've classified it as a card skimming device. It does not have card skimming capabilities, but there's lots of YouTube videos out there with people opening Tesla charging doors and stuff like that with their Flipper Zero. But just an interesting story on the Flipper. And then here's one that I think is super applicable to this entire group, at least those of us who are Mac and iOS users. There have been actually 3 zero-day exploits that have been reported this year with Apple. This was discovered by a third party, and there are 2 0 days. One is, it's really more of a crashing vulnerability that was addressed. And the second one, though, if you just roll up to a malicious website, they can get control of your device. So the patch was just released last Friday. And if you're the type of person to, you know, get around to it when you get to it, I would strongly advise you to upgrade all your Apple devices. So it's not just Mac OS, it's also, you know, iPhone, iPads are also vulnerable to this. This is the list of devices that could be affected by this. And these are the latest patch upgrades. So fix your devices. I thought this was also interesting. I don't know how many of you guys are, you know, sort of deeply integrating FileMaker stuff with web content, but the fact that cookies are, you know, I don't know how long it's going to take to play out, but it looks like cookies are going away. So just be aware of this. It's an interesting thing. They are coming up with an alternative to cookies that they're calling the privacy sandbox. These will be changes to Chrome and Android, and could very likely be sort of copied by other applications. But sort of an interesting thing that cookies have been around forever. And so the notion that these could be going away and kind of a fundamental function of web browsers might change is worth noting. Okay, let's switch over to Claris news. And Evans did a post on April 4th, save the date for Claris Engage for February of next year, February 2024. The dates are 6th through 8th. And they also very nicely posted links to all the events that are happening between now and that point, is sort of, follow the yellow brick road to Claris Engage. And, some of you may or may not be aware that a certain Stephen Blackwell has been saying for ages now that he hopes he gets to go to in-person Engage again before he's in the box with Bentham. And so now he gets his wish. And so he won't end up in the box with Bentham, but maybe we could give him a jaunty hat to make it look like he has gone into the box with Bentham. Claris Studio, April 6th, they posted a new release. There are a bunch of features. I mean, for me personally, the big ones I'm waiting on are, the alternative authentication and the ability to sort of use Claris Studio as a client portal or a customer portal, so they can log in and see content that's specific to them. There's a ton of stuff in here, though. More calculation functions, date and time functions, test functions, field objects, having math tied to field objects. So a lot of stuff, and big and they put a ton of stuff in this release. So there are lots of significant enhancements to Claris Studio, and they're great, but I'm still waiting for the big ones that are kind of barriers to adoption. Announcements. Do we have Matt Navarre here? Yes, no, I guess not. He put an announcement out and he said he wanted to sort of pipe up in this segment of the program. So Claris.training, they're coming up with a intensive class May 9th through June 29th. And this is really aimed at, developers. March 9th, MBS released their 13.1 release. Databuzz updated their FM accounting link. And I think that's all I have on announcement. Does anybody else have any other announcements that they would like to weigh in here? Oh, Jeremy Brown. Jeremy, do you want to unmute yourself?
Sure. Hey. Just, always notifications that in the community that I'm trying to build for JavaScript in FileMaker, I've got trainings helping people learn how to use it as efficiently as possible. Most of us who have done JavaScript know about data tables. It's like the most prolific library in our world. And I've got 15 courses on it that teach one specific skill. So replicating, like grouping or summarizing or conditional formatting, all that stuff. So check out my community. It's just the community is just a place to talk about and learn about JavaScript and FileMaker. So, it's open and free for everybody, but there are courses there as well.
Do you want to post a link in the chat?
What?
Can you post a link in the chat?
Yes, it's community.jsnfm.com. I do office hours every Wednesday at 9:30 and 3 p.m. Eastern time, where we just talk through JavaScript stuff. And I think I'm going to do something here in May, and other user groups in the community as well. So yeah, I would love for y'all to be part of it and contribute what you know about JavaScript and FileMaker.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Thanks for the info. Upcoming events. I show this every month just to sort of keep score and whatnot. And now we have the new one, the big one. I haven't added to the bottom of this. So this is sort of the stepping stones to Engage next year. So .fmp, FMK Basel is a German-speaking conference, but all the rest of these are English-speaking. So even the FM Guru one in Rome is English-speaking with interpreters. And that is all the news I have. So I got through it at a record pace this time.
I have a question though for Roseberry. What happened to the rule that we have to have Engage or DevCon in the hottest possible place in the hottest possible month?
I have no idea. I am not complaining about being able to escape Boston for Texas in February.
Has DevCon ever happened in another month than the summer months?
Yes, way back in the beginning. The first couple were in the spring, if I remember right. Because I went to one in May. So many years ago.
Cool. Yeah, this should be good. And I assume you guys are going to avail yourself of the Apple tech IT talent and whatnot in Austin. So that should be
yeah.
I found out that we're sleeping under benches in the courtyard. Is that right? And underneath the product tables and the, you know.
So many more details to come in the upcoming weeks. And I just want to call out Tony's announcement that there will be product updates.
Rosemary, thank you. And there's, I don't know exactly how many. There's many, not just the Northeast, which I posted the link to.
Yeah.
There's going to be a bunch of them. Yeah.
Yeah. Let me think if I can rattle them off the top of my head. On May 4th, we'll be doing the German groups and the Northeast groups. May 5th is Dallas. May 12th, Ronnie and Doug will be at FMDiSC. They'll be at FM Bug on the 15th. And there's two more. Doug is doing the French-speaking user group out of Quebec at the end of May. And I feel like I missed one. So keep your eyes open.
Midwest?
No. Dallas. Yeah. I'm sure. Hold on. I could go look at the list.
And then, Rosemary, while you're doing that, the Northeast is Connecticut, New Jersey, Boston, Pennsylvania, and one other city I forget. Oh, New York. So you know, if you miss New York, friendly city, and you can go to multiple, right? There's no limit. There's not one to a customer.
Yeah. I'm looking at my list right now. Northeast, Dallas.
And I don't know, Dig, is Dig FM doing it separate than FMDiSC, or is there like a California consortium?
Yeah. I think it will be a California consortium. Oh, and the other one is Claris Beyond. So
a little Pacific Northwest action.
The Pacific Northwest, yes.
Go to them all. Okay, thank you.
Awesome. Wim, are you ready to go?
I am.
All right. So, well, Wim, I'll let you do your own introduction, but we're getting into business continuity and, you know, in keeping with the theme of resilience, recoverability, business continuity, disaster recovery, all those good things. So, Wim, take it away.
All right. So, you know those conversations that start with, we need to talk? This may be one of those, right? So it is not going to be a deeply technical session. I'm not going to show you command lines and lots of scripts and whatnot. But I do hope it's going to be a deeply conceptual topic. And I'm hoping to plant some seeds and inspire some conversation about these things. So my name is Wim Decorte. I'm a director at Soliant. Soliant does 4 things: FileMaker, Salesforce, AWS, and all things web. So I run the FileMaker side of the house. That's me. All right. So what is it exactly that we're going to talk about? And I have these things listed there in order for a reason. And to put some definition around those, when we talk about resilience, we really mean making sure that your solution and the way that it's deployed doesn't fall over at the first breath of wind that passes through, right? And a simple spike in power should not take your solution down. Or we can take it a little step further. If there's an area in one area of your solution, it shouldn't take the whole solution down, right? Resilience really means the ability of the solution to continue to function as intended, or at least maybe partial, if not fully, right? So it should not be binary. It shouldn't fall down at the first sight of trouble. So resilience is that. Business continuity is a much larger topic. Business continuity speaks to the business itself, your clients, to be able to conduct their business as close to usual as possible to basically continue to function. And that means with or without your solution, right? And we'll get into that a little bit. So that's really all about focusing on the business being able to conduct business. Disaster recovery typically is only a subset of your business continuity. Disaster recovery is going to be more tightly focused on your solution and the way that it's deployed. And if something did happen to it, how quickly can you get back to it? And any business, any client of yours will typically have multiple systems that they have, right? So a business continuity plan will have any number of these disaster recovery islands in them, one for each system, because the way that you go about recovering from a disaster for your FileMaker solution is not going to be the same as, say, from whatever they do with Salesforce, for instance, or their QuickBooks solution, right? So disaster recovery is more tightly focused on the way that your FileMaker solution works and the way that it's deployed and how quickly you can recover from a disaster. So not quite the same disaster recovery and business continuity. And the thing that can take your system down or your solution down, that could be really anything, right? It could be something environmental like power, or it could be a flood or a fire or anything like that. It could be things like earthquakes. For you guys in California, that's clearly a concern. But it could also be a hostile act, meaning physical. You can have a strike on your hands, and people don't like your client's business, and they'll go out and picket the office and throw stones in the windows. But it could be a cyber attack as well, right? Ransomware, we've talked about it many times. It has come up in what Duane was saying as well. The cyber attacks and the ransomware attacks have grown tremendously exponentially over the last years. So they are a clear and imminent threat. That should be something to pay attention to. And it has the power to take your solution down and basically paralyze your client. And so there's a whole wide range of things that could constitute a crisis of the nature that can affect the business continuity. And these things, and these are typically terms and phrases that you may have heard in interactions with your biggest clients. One of the main takeaways, I think, is that this equally applies to smaller clients. Like even the smallest client can benefit from somebody having a conversation with them about disaster recovery, about business continuity. And if it isn't your client forcing you to have these conversations or to think about these things as they relate to the solution that you've built for them, I think we can deliver great service to our clients by initiating the conversation. And I think we should. And I'm hoping that will become clear as I go through my presentation, that I think we should take the lead in having these conversations with our clients. That sort of brings us into the question of who are you, who are we, right? And who do you want to be in that story of talking about resilience and disaster recovery and business continuity? What role do you want to play? And I think it's a critical thing to think about. Do you want to be just a FileMaker person? Do you want to be just a FileMaker order taker? Or are you a consultant? And I think if you're a consultant, you have to think about these things, and you have to be able to put these things on the table and have conversations with your clients about that. And as I'm hoping to demonstrate in later in the presentation, a lot of these conversations do not come at the tail end, right? It's not, oh, we'll develop whatever we need developing first, and then we'll have these conversations. A lot of the outcome of these conversations will determine, to some extent, how you will architect your solution, how you're going to deploy your solution, the factors that you have to take into account for disaster recovery and business continuity have an effect in how you build these things, right? So these things should not be afterthoughts. They should be things that we think about ahead of time. So we'll come back to this question. I think it's a fairly fundamental question, and it's one that I've been talking about a lot. I guess Clara's used this term too. We've been using it in our community. We like to think about ourselves as problem solvers, and I think that's fair. That's exactly what we do. We solve problems, but there's a reason we solve problems, right? And for me, it's really about our ability to deliver value. When a client set out to give us work, because they do that because they trust us to solve a problem, and the solution to that problem will give them value, and enough value that whatever money that they want to spend on the solution and on you is worth it, right? And for me, that's critical. What we do is deliver value, and we use technology as a means to do that. Other businesses use other means to deliver value to your customers, but for us, we deliver value by crafting a solution, and the solution the FileMaker solution is a solution to a particular problem, but it's really all about that value. This is a screenshot that I've taken from a graphic that I had in an old blog post, and then I'll mention the blog post later. This goes back a decade, right? And what we're seeing here is that's the process that we as developers spend most of our time on, right? From gathering specs all the way to go live. In between that is where we shine. This is where we spend most of our time. This is where we spend most of our thinking on. That's our thing, right? The client explains the problem, we do something in FileMaker, and it solves the problem at the end of that. For the client, though, that's not where they get their value, right? The client does not get value. At this point, it's just cost to the client. You're just costing them money. They haven't seen any value whatsoever. The client gets value after the go live. The minute after you deploy the thing, that's when the client will start to begin to get value from that. And they will get value only when that solution is up and running and it does its thing. And hopefully they can get that value for a really long time, right? And for me, that again, that's a critical point, right? The realization that it doesn't really matter how well I craft my solution, the coolest techniques that I use, the whatever technology stack that I favor, that's all good and well. But if what I deploy doesn't stay up, if it's get taken down by ransomware, if it falls over because it's on a crappy server, whatever the reason, then the client does not get the value, and that's a problem, right? Because that's what the client got engaged with you for, to get to that value delivery. So if we cannot guarantee that, then we've not done our job, really. This is that blog post from 10 years ago. That's the one that has those two graphics in there, and it was inspired by an exchange on the community where a developer was really venting and ranting and riling and pushing back on a client because the solution didn't do what it's supposed to do, and the developer said, "I'm a developer. Don't ask me to think about these other things. I gave you the solution. All the rest is your problem." And I'm not saying that's a wrong point of view. It's not my point of view, and I have a big opinion about that. But it's something that I don't agree with because of that value delivery, right? And more recently, in a conversation with Jeremy, we were talking about that as well, and it's the same thing. So about almost to the date, 10 years later, I did a recap or a redo of that same blog post to talk about whose responsibility some of these things are. And in both of those cases, in the story that Jeremy told and in that original one from 10 years ago, at the core is a client who is not happy because there was a failure to deliver that value that we talked about, right? And like I said, that's a problem. And it's a problem that shouldn't be there. In that redo of that blog post, these are sort of like the key points that I make, right? So 1 and 2 is what we as developers tend to spend most of our time on. When we develop our skills, that's where we do it, right? For our clients, though, those first 2 are really important, but 3, 4, and 5 are equally as important. and we need to pay attention to that, right? And as developers, and typically as FileMaker developers, that's a bit of a challenge, right? Because that may require skills that we don't think we have, or we know we don't have them. And some of us will set out to acquire the skills. Some of us will not want to, and that's fine. I really hold no judgment whether you want to have those skills or not want to have the skills. It's not having the skills that's important. It's the knowledge that this should have some weight to it, that we need to pay attention to these things, right? So again, no judgment. I'm not saying that only developers that have these skills are good developers. That's not what I'm saying. If you want to go out and get those skills, all the more power to you. I salute you. If you don't want to, that's fine too. But we know it's there. Like we cannot pretend that these things are not important. And if that means that you need to go out and find help to have these conversations with your clients about, that's just fine. Again, no judgment, right? But it's kind of important that we pay attention to that, because the one thing that we cannot do is ignore it, right? We don't need to have the skills ourselves, but we cannot ignore it. So that really comes back down to what I said before, right? It's as a developer, as a consultant, you need to define who you are, and that's, for me, that's part of that, right? That knowledge of that of those vital aspects of a deployment and delivering that value, and what you want to do with that. Because at the end of the day, if you think about it, and something that we talk about inside at Soliant a lot, right? Because what is it that we're selling, right? It isn't our technical prowess that we're selling. And yes, we have to be really good technically at the tool sets that we're using. That's a table stakes, though, right? It's a client will assume that we know how to use the tools that we advertise. That's really not the qualifier. That's not the thing that will make clients stick with us, right? They may come to us to some extent because of that, but that's not why they stick with us. The only thing that we sell really is trust, right? The client needs to trust that we can deliver on that value that the client is after. If we cannot do that, if that trust is broken because there's a failure in the delivery of that value, the client is not going to come back, or even worse, right? The client is going to badmouth us, right? So that's at its core. That's why we think that is so crucial to do this well. And again, I don't mean that you personally will have to do this well. It's just that you have the knowledge that this is important, and then you figure out what to do with that. All right, so let's get into some of these things: the resilience, data, disaster recovery, and business continuity. And there's a couple of obvious ones that speak to resilience, right? And your FileMaker server should be on a UPS, right? It should have a power backup so that at least a spike in power or a short power outage doesn't take it down. Right? That's just a very, very small thing. Also, your FileMaker server should have the spare capacity to handle variations in load. And I'm throwing that sort of out there casually, but that's really already a potential pain point. We see it every day on the community where people go like, why is my server not behaving well? Or what is the cheapest server I can get away with for 5 users, that kind of thing, right? So I guess I can turn that around a little bit, because it's such an obvious statement, right? Like your server should have the spare capacity to handle the variations in load and obviously to handle the basic load that it needs to handle. But do you know what that capacity, what that looks like, right? Do you know whether your solution, the way that you build your solution, whether it needs more cores or does it need faster cores? Is the way that your solution works, is there a constraint on the disk I/O? So the answer to these things would be things that I would hope that you ask yourself once in a while. And again, not that you would have to have the skills necessarily to give the answers, but the question should come up so that you can set out and try to find answers for some of these things. And the answer to some of these things, capacity-wise, certainly, but also other things will come from monitoring, right? Monitoring should be such an obvious thing that is built into deployments from the get-go, not as an afterthought when you have a couple of bad or the client has a couple of bad experiences, and you go like, yeah, I wish we had known that this happened, right? Instead of the server being down for 4 hours and the clients complaining and nobody knowing anything about that. And of course, if it's a catastrophic failure, like the whole FileMaker server crashes, you'd know. But there's plenty of outages that can be partial, where performance degrades and the clients live with pain for a day or two before they start complaining, right? Monitoring will solve a lot of that. Again, this speaks to resilience, right? This speaks to knowing what is going on so that you can step in before things become a catastrophe, right? Before there's hair on fire emergencies all over the place. And monitoring can help with that. And this applies, of course, to the solution, your solution as deployed on FileMaker Server, but it also applies to the wider things, everything that happens, infrastructure, other systems, whatnot. And part of the conversation there with clients is about, and especially if a client has an IT department, is to engage that IT department and ask them how they do monitoring, because it doesn't really matter how they do it. There is going to be a chance that monitoring FileMaker Server can very easily slide into how they do their monitoring already, and I'll tackle that in a little bit. So monitoring really comes down to knowing the numbers, right? The FileMaker Server can give you numbers on a lot of different things, so we should do that. And this is probably my very latest blog post from about 2 weeks ago, when I finally had enough of FileMaker Server getting installed by default with all of the logging, all of the crucial logging turned off, right? And you may have seen this, and you may have been deliberately not enabling the logging on FileMaker Server, because some of these, the ones that we have in yellow there, especially the top call stats log, if you turn it on, you'll get a nasty warning that says, "Are you sure? Because this may affect your FileMaker Server," right? Nonsense, right? Read the blog post. I've done some measuring on that. It's a ridiculous warning, and yes, I have a very strong opinion about that. So keep an open mind on that. But turn on the logging on your FileMaker Server, pretty please, right? You need to know the numbers. If you don't know the numbers, you're flying blind. And I'm mentioning this in the blog post. The number of times that clients come to us, new clients, and they have performance issues and they don't know where to look and all of these things. And the very first thing I ask is, send me the logs. And they go, "What logs? There are no logs." And what it really means is that we say, well, turn on the logs. Come back in 2 weeks or come back in 3 weeks, right? We shouldn't be in that position. We shouldn't have to tell the client, "I'm sorry, you'll have to live with the pain for another 3 weeks because FileMaker Server ships with all of its logging turned off," right? Ridiculous. We shouldn't be in that place. Anyway, having said that, so that's the very first thing you need to do. You may walk away from this meeting right now and do this first. I'll forgive you. It's that important. So that'll give you numbers. The next step really is knowing what those numbers mean. There's lots of help in the community to do that. We've had these presentations before where we go through that and figure out what does it mean. But they're crucial. They're crucial because they give you a baseline. You can use those numbers to see how they fluctuate when you add functionality, when the client switches to a different server, when they add more users to the system. So these numbers are going to be critical. A couple of years ago, we did DEF CON presentations on using Zabbix as a monitoring platform, and this sort of ties into what I was saying before. If you are working with a client that has an IT department, have that conversation about monitoring. Ask how they're doing it, and even if it's not Zabbix, you can read what we have on Zabbix, and you can look at the templates of the things that we monitor by using Zabbix, and you can have these conversations with the IT department to say, look, here's a Zabbix template. If you're not using Zabbix, at least we can read that and see what we should be monitoring. Right? You can treat it as a menu of all the things you can monitor, and work together with the IT department with whatever they do their monitoring, whether it's Datadog or New Relic or Nagios or any of the industry-leading platforms can very easily include everything that is relevant for the FileMaker side. So do that. An important aspect of that too is and that falls in that category of resilience a little bit, is a lot of these things that we can measure, we can take action on. And FileMaker Server has a great command line, an admin command line, has a great admin API. So if things fail, like the server-side scripting engine or the data API or any of the other FileMaker Server processes, you can capture that, and you can take, or you can have your monitoring platform take immediate action, right? And then send you notification. So by the time you get a notification, the problem is fixed already. So there's a lot of self-healing you can do that will get you that resilience that is already baked into FileMaker and FileMaker Server, right? It's just there for us to unlock and use. So give that some thought. Backups. Duane has already talked about backups a little bit, and I'll expand on the topics a little bit there. And very often, the topic of backups is a great entry point into these conversations about resilience and disaster recovery and business continuity. So these questions really start with this one. Well, there's three questions, and they go hand in hand together. And the first one would go like, how many restore points do you want? Restore points is basically the number of backup sets and how far back in time they go. Like, how many do you want, Mr. Client? Keeping in mind that some of these crises that we're trying to either avoid or recover from, not all of them are of the catastrophic nature, right? If your server crashes, the answer is kind of simple. You want to go back to a backup that is ideally minutes old at max, right? So that you minimize the amount of data loss. But some of the catastrophes or crises are more insidious, right? And maybe it's our fault. Maybe we introduced a bug a couple of releases ago that now affects the data integrity. And we need to go back to a backup data-wise of months ago, right? Does the way that you've set up backups or the way that your client wants backups, does that allow you to do that? Right? There are ransomware attacks that poison your data, right? So it's not really all about stealing your data, like locking you down and stealing your data. Sometimes they'll just poison your data, and you won't know until you find out, which may be weeks after the fact. Does your backup strategy allow you to go back to any point in time? And if not, maybe that should be part of the conversation with your client. To some extent related to the number of restore points, but not entirely, is how frequent should we do the backups? And this speaks to how much data are you willing to lose, right? The more frequent you do your backups, the lesser amount of data that you're going to lose if you have to revert to one of these backups, right? If you could do backups every second, you're only going to lose a second's worth of data, which is in real terms nothing, right? If you only do a backup every hour, you're going to at most lose an hour's worth of data. If you only do your backups at nights, that's a full day, right? And very often this is a critical point, right? Where backups don't happen because of the architecture of the file, it's too big, it's too slow, the server isn't up to taking the backups, so backups don't happen. And it won't surprise you that I have a blog post about those things as well. So I'll get to that in a sec. And then the last question around these things is, how long can we be down for, right? So if something happens, we know we have a backup, that's not a problem, but how long does it take us to put the backup back and get back into action? That's a critical question as well. How much downtime? Now, when you engage your client in a conversation like that, and these are great topics for that kind of thing, right? That's a perfect lead-in for a lot of these conversations. The answer to this question cannot be, I'm not willing to lose any data, I'm not willing to lose any time. That does not exist, right? But the closer they want to get to that ideal, the more money they will have to spend on that. And the more time you will have to spend on putting that together, right? Because that's the consequence. The answer to these questions drive exactly that kind of thing. And sometimes, depending on those answers, if they want to get really close to the ideal, it's going to take a fair amount of time to get there, right? So you have to factor that into the cost of the project as well, which is why, as I said before, these should not be afterthoughts, right? These should not be things you think about just because the go live is coming up next weekend, right? This should be discussed way ahead of time. Also because if they want to do blazingly fast backups and have a great many backups and have a very short frequency of backups, that may mean that you have to change the architecture of your solution to help make that happen. And we'll talk about that more. Duane already mentioned 3-2-1. I think that's a great way to think about these things. Make sure you have 3 sets of every backup, that you have it on at least 2 mediums, and that you have it in at least 1 other place. Right? It's been around since forever, but it's a great way to think about these things, because then you can start thinking about how do we achieve this. And again, a great topic of conversation with your client, right? Where you say this is sort of like an industry standard, if you will, and how do we get there, and how important is it to you? Because you may have a client where you ask these questions and they say, we don't care if we lose a week's worth of data. It's not that important, right? That's probably not going to happen, because otherwise, why are they engaging with us to help solve their problem and deliver value, right? But it may happen. That's why we have these conversations. And as I mentioned, depending on what the answers are to these things, you may have to design with this in mind, and design not only your solution, for instance, the number of files, the size of the files, what tables are the busiest, that kind of thing. But you will also have potentially to design the infrastructure on which your solution is going to run. Right? Is the server up to taking a backup every 5 minutes? Are the disks fast enough? Does it have enough spare capacity on its processing side to do that? If you then want to take a move, say that the solution is 100 gigs, right? If that solution is 100 gigs, and then you want to move that away from the server as quickly after a backup is done as you can, that is going to affect your network. Is the network up to that? Right? Again, these are all reasons why this should not be an afterthought, but part of your conversations really early on when you engage with your client. And the other thing is to think about not being traditional, right? What Duane was talking about, doing backups the FileMaker style, and then figuring out how to make those immutable, moving them to a different place, and that's good. In this blog post, this is the blog post that I mentioned, and actually, I think around this time in 2021, we did an FMDiSC presentation on the mechanics of what's in there. And it speaks to the non-traditional part of that, right? FileMaker Server can do backups. It can do regular backups, progressive backups. I believe in 19.5, 19.6, it gave us the ability to do parallel backups within the normal backups. So these are all basically just ways of doing backups as we've known it for decades at this point. But that's not the only way that we need to do backups. And the other part of that is if we do stick with normal backups, even and Stephen Blackwell may know this exactly. I forget when this was introduced, but we're talking about probably 10 to 15 years of FileMaker Server doing backups the way that they're currently still doing, and we still find ourselves explaining things like hard linking, right? How many times does it come up on the community where somebody says, "Well, my solution is 30 gigs and I have 200 gigs worth of remote container data. I cannot back this up every 15 minutes, or not even every hour. I don't have the disk space for 150 gigabytes." I'm going like, yeah, that's not really how backups work, right? Like understanding the way that backups work and the way that you can get efficiency with hard linking is crucial, and it speaks to potentially how you design your solution to take full advantage of that, right? Because that hard linking is critical. But that's still somewhat within the traditional realm of doing backups. The non-traditional way of doing backups is to use, actually, I'll come back to that. FileMaker Cloud, so basically the managed hosting offered by Claris, doesn't use FileMaker Server backups. It does not, right? When we do backups on our Soliant Cloud and we manage hundreds of servers for our clients, we don't use FileMaker backups. We don't. And you go like, wait, what? Backups are important. Yes, they are, and we take plenty of backups, but we don't use the FileMaker mechanism. We use the mechanisms provided by the hypervisor. And then in that FMDiSC presentation I did a while ago, we chose not to do the hypervisor route, but to use the snapshotting abilities that are built into the macOS and the Windows OS, right? That's a non-traditional way of doing backup, and you can do this safely. You have to jump through just one hurdle, and that's to put FileMaker Server in a paused state. But if you do that, those backups are blazingly fast. You can take a backup of these every couple of seconds, and the users won't know. It's also incredibly efficient when it comes to disk space, because they do not back up the whole thing. They do not take a copy of your 30 gig FileMaker file and a copy of all the 100 gigs worth of your remote containers data and find disk space to make that happen. That's not how these backups work, right? They just take incremental blocks and write that off to somewhere. And then when you want to restore, you get the full set, right? Like, you don't magically have to reassemble blocks to get to your files. That's what these mechanisms already do for you. It does mean that you need to look at the way that you think about restoring from these things, because restoring from one of these is slightly different than just going to one of the FileMaker Server backup folders and copying something over, right? But that's just a one-off thing where you look at the way that you restore from that and figure out how to codify that a little bit so that you know how to do these things. So there are a couple of other things that we can think about, and we mentioned some of them already, so I'll dive into that a little more. And the first one is the way that we design our solutions. The absolute worst way that you can create your FileMaker solution is create a monolith, right? And it came up on the ETS list just this week, last week maybe, where somebody said, I forget the exact context of what it is, but I can't mention it. But the gist of it was that somebody said, we spend a lot of time and effort in making sure that our FileMaker solution is a single file, that all the tables are in that one file. And I physically cringed, right? Because that's the exact definition of most of the problems that are brought to our doorstep. Monolithic files, right? Don't do it. It's bad. It's a horrible way to create a FileMaker solution. So I will be very mad at you when you do this, right? If that carries any weight, I will be mad at you. Don't do it. So what are the alternatives? The alternatives are to not do that, right? We mentioned the efficiencies that you can get from things like backups by splitting off, and it's more than backups, right? Just the overall way that you can improve performance in a FileMaker solution by not having a single file far outweigh the penalty that comes with not having a single file, right? Because we're not blind to the obvious benefits of having a single file, right? That you only have one set of your custom functions, one set of your accounts, one set of your custom menus. I get all of that, right? But the benefit of those do not outweigh the badness that you have with a single monolithic file. So you can split it up. You can find ways of looking at the data that doesn't change much. And when I say much, I really mean that doesn't change between backup runs. If you do your backups every hour and you have big history tables that you only push data to once a day, those are perfect examples to keep in their own files, right? If you have tables that receive a lot of your data edits and you have other tables that are mostly used for reading, split off those tables that receive most of the reads, right? Because most of the writes, because you will get better performance, and that better performance that impact of that will be bigger. The bigger your load is, the more records you have, the more frequent those writes are, right? So think about these things to break off your solution along those lines, right? It doesn't need to be sort of like the traditional data separation model where you have one data file, one UI file. That's not really what I'm talking about, right? It's really about figuring out what data manipulations are happening in your files, in your tables, and then splitting off those tables in their own files based off of that, because you will get potentially some serious performance benefits when it comes to running backups, right? Because the worst thing that can happen, and that's what I had in a blog post, is that backups don't happen, right? You never want to find yourself in a solution like that, in a scenario like that. How does the saying go? There's only two kinds of people in this world. People who have lost data and people who will, right? So you can get away with a lot where nothing happens and the way that it's deployed is just fine until it isn't, right? Distributed architecture carries a slightly different meaning, where you basically split off functionality and you call that functionality in a way, typically through APIs, but it doesn't have to be with FileMaker stuff, but that you functionally isolate things that belong together, and then you marry these two. That sort of speaks to something that I said early on in the conversation, where by doing that, you can think about this as being modular to some extent, if you will, but by doing that, you can isolate problems in one area. If one area fails, then potentially you can continue to work in the other ones with some reduced functionality, but it doesn't need to be a catastrophic failure. And that's what you'll get when you have a monolith, right? Like if something happens somewhere in your file, it takes the whole file down and you got nothing. Not even a little bit of functionality is available to your customer. If we extend the distributed architecture a little bit, we can also think about using solved problems. And with solved problems, I really mean things, if we put them on the make or buy scale, is that we don't need to recreate everything in FileMaker. It's one of the trends that we see in the last, I would say, 5 years or so, where we come from a place where FileMaker developers build everything in FileMaker, right? Everything that needs to be done as part of the workflows that the users are after is done in FileMaker. Whereas now, really and partly because FileMaker is so good at integrating with things, we don't need to do that anymore. We can restrict FileMaker to deliver value for the clients in those areas that are really unique to our clients. But when it comes to, say, PDF generation, or accounting is an obvious one, emailing is another obvious one, right? We don't need to do that from inside FileMaker, right? There's APIs out there that we can use, and if it's not an API that you need to subscribe to necessarily, it could just be a JavaScript library that is really good at doing one thing. So why wouldn't we use that? And if we're going to use it, we can make the choice to not do it from inside FileMaker necessarily, meaning using a library in a web viewer. We can make that an API that we call, right? We can do that microservice style. Back late last year, I gave a presentation to the Montreal Developer Conference about exactly that. And a lot of that presentation was in showing how me as a FileMaker developer can create a microservice in a very easy way, because very often conceptually people get it, right? Like we go, yeah, I know that I can do this as a microservice, but I don't know how to get there. Like, I mean, literally mechanically, what do I do on my machine? Like, and that's what I did in that presentation. And a lot of that you can follow in that blog post. It's really meant to. It's not meant as a training exercise. I think Jeremy can do a much better job on that one. But it's really just an eye-opener to say it's not that hard, right? If I can do it, anybody can do it, and that's just the truth of it. It's really to take the sting out of getting started with these things, right? So that's one way to think about that. Right. So we covered design, infrastructure. Infrastructure as code is a thing, right? And to give you a quick example, what I really mean by that is that infrastructure these days is just an API call, and that's the way that it should be, right? And there's really great reading material about these things, about how servers should not be pets, right? They should be cattle, right? We shouldn't be so attached to a server that we give it a name, that we pamper it, that we baby it, right? That's not the point. A server should be a utility thing that if it goes down, we'll get one exactly like that, and we don't really care that we got another one, right? That's what I mean by cattle, not a pet, right? And infrastructure as code is really meant to do just that, right? If I need a server with certain specs, it should really be just a push of a button and I get that server. And of course, you go like, yeah, I can hear you coming. That's the cloud stuff. That's true. A lot of the cloud works like that, but that's not restricted to the cloud, right? Like a lot of these same principles apply to on-premise stuff. And if you work with clients that have an IT department that do virtualization, they already do a lot of this stuff, right? Like things, the AWS, they call it CloudFormation, but there's a lot of tools out there that do exactly that, right? You define your server as code so that when you need one, you just execute a bit of code and you get the server. And to put this in perspective, because this is real, right? This is my FileMaker file, and I'm not after any awards for UI and UX design. I suck at it. You probably can't tell. But if you look at the number of records, that's 154. That's how many ETS servers I have, right? They're not all running at the same time, but this is how I define it. If I need a new server in ETS, I come here, I create a new record, I specify the AWS zone because we use AWS extensively. I specify what size disk I want, what operating system I want, what security groups, and a security group really is nothing more than firewall rules, right? Whether I want to use a machine image that has some things pre-installed, and I click this button there that says build servers for found set, and a minute later I have my server, right? And this is FileMaker, right? This is how I do it. I manage all of my ETS servers from inside FileMaker. That is infrastructure as code. The thing that I don't do, and that speaks to the previous point about the architecture and the design, I don't have FileMaker make API calls to AWS. I just don't. It makes no sense. What I do, that should have. There we go. What I do have is a microservice. Why do I have a microservice for that? Because AWS gives you all the tools that you need to write code, right? This little piece of code that we're looking at from line 349 down to 376, that's all the code that you need to spin up a server. The thing that FileMaker does, it's create a JSON description of my FileMaker server with the specs that I just specified. Then I give that JSON to my microservice. Basically, all my FileMaker does is call my microservice, giving it that JSON. This one will do the talking to AWS, including the authentication. That's already in that little thing of code there. Authentication is taken care of against AWS. It takes my JSON, spins up a server. And a lot of that code is really checking whether I did get some JSON. The core of this is basically just line 365 and 369. Right? If I wanted to write my code without checking whether my microservice received any JSON, 2 lines of code and I would be done. Right? That's the power of microservices when you interact with something like that. If something else like that has an SDK, just like AWS does, that's really as simple as it gets. Right? So when it comes to infrastructure, this is the way to think about these things. Right? And again, I'm not saying that you should all go out and get these skills. That's not what we're after. Necessarily. If you want to get these skills, reach out, right? We can talk about these things. The more skills we have, the better, but it's not necessary to have these skills. Just know that this is how infrastructure is done these days. The implication of that is that it's really easy to spin up a new server, right? It should be a matter of seconds, minutes maybe, if I want to be generous. And you get the exact server with the exact specs that you want. That is what infrastructure as code means. Now the next step from that, and it's already happening, is infrastructure from code. We're not quite there yet on the FileMaker side, but for a lot of other technology stacks, that's exactly what you can do, where you actually write your functional code, say JavaScript, right? You write the code that not the code to define a server, but the code to solve the problem for your client, right? Whatever it is that you like, generating PDFs, for instance, right? You write your code, and then from that code, AI, because that's really a lot of that is AI driven, will deduce what server it needs or what services it needs if you want to go serverless, and can then give you that JSON the one that I create manually in FileMaker. It will then give you that and can spin up those servers for you that are suitable to the code that you've just written, right? That's not future talk, right? That's already happening. It's not happening in the FileMaker space, but it's already happening. So it's pretty amazing stuff. The other thing, and Duane talked about this a little bit, is when it comes to infrastructure, there too, you may want to think about backup locations. Right? If you, especially with ransomware, that's sort of like the #1 use case for a lot of these things. If your infrastructure gets compromised, right? Do you have another location to turn to? Do you have a server somewhere that you can press into action? And that could be your development server. That could be your UAT server, right? Those would be good uses for for repurposing those servers for a short while until you actually recover from the disaster. But from a business continuity point of view, if your development server is in a different place, is not linked in any way so that it could not be compromised in the same ransomware attack, that's perfect, right? Because now you serve the purpose, two purposes really. You have a development server or testing server, and it's in a place where one ransomware attack cannot get to it, and you can use that for business continuity. Same with backup machines, and we've talked about servers, and that's sort of like the normal thing to think about. But you may also want to talk about or think about client machines. Again, this has come up in ransomware conversations where it makes sense for your client to have one or two completely decked out laptops, typically would be laptops, or desktop machines stored away somewhere, not plugged into the network, but kept up to date, away from the network, that if a ransomware attack happens, or something else, like a fire in their building, that they have their machines somewhere that they can spin up a mini environment that allows them to continue to do business. Right? Business continuity is served in that fashion. So these would be things to think about. And then we should also think about non-system ways of getting to business continuity. Everything that we talked a bit about so far is really about getting them back to a set of infrastructure that closely mimics and resembles what they had before, maybe in a scaled down fashion. But we should also think about other ways of doing that. And this came up about 10, 12 years ago when I was working on a project for a bank. And the FileMaker system that they had devised was really meant to facilitate something, a workflow, but it ended up being the system of record. It was a system for dispersing small loans beneath under $50,000 or something like that. And so the system, and a typical FileMaker story, I should say, probably, the system became the system of record because it was so great. Like, people really enjoyed the way that they could mold it to do exactly what they want to do. So they basically went from taking applications on paper, walking that paper around for a couple of days, to shifting over to doing everything in FileMaker, where the funds would get dispersed into the client's bank account inside hours. Inside 12 hours was where they got to. So huge efficiency improvements from where they were. But along the way, they stopped taking paper applications. They basically, when a client walked into to a branch, they would basically just type it all into the FileMaker system, right? So if the FileMaker system came down, they had nothing. And that's exactly what happened, right? The FileMaker system went down, and they go like, holy crap, like, we cannot process any applications. So we sat down with the business and we talked about that, like, what can we do to make it so that for whatever short amount of time, the time it takes us to rebuild the infrastructure and get it back to you, what do you need to continue to work? And the way that we did it for this particular case was every 5 minutes, the FileMaker system, the FileMaker server, would spit out in Excel format the ongoing applications, and then would move those Excel files over to another server, so that if the FileMaker system went down, they at least they had Excel files with the data of the things that they would need to process, and then they would use those and go back to their paper process until they got the system back, right? So it's not really all about backups and getting the exact files back and getting the exact infrastructure back. Sometimes it's thinking outside the box a little bit and working with the business and having that conversation to ask them, like, what is it that you need? Like, forget about the system. Like, if you didn't have the system, what is it at a minimum that you would need to continue to work? All right. So some of the things that we tend to forget as we go through this process with clients, and one of them is documenting everything. And I'm talking about writing procedures. That's one aspect of that. And procedures, sort of by nature, tend to go stale and are not updated. And then you need a procedure, and you go like, that's not how it is anymore, right? Like, there's a location in here to say, go grab the FileMaker installer and the license key from there, and it's not there. Oh yeah, because we moved it to another server 6 months ago, right? So procedures are important when you go through disaster recovery and business continuity. I was going to say drills, but we'll get to drills later. But if you need to do this for real with your hair on fire, you need a procedure that is up to date. So documenting and keeping that documentation up to date is critical. The other aspect of documentation is to document the answers to the questions that we talked about throughout this presentation, right? Document the decision-making process so that at any time you can look back and say, okay, what were our assumptions at the time that we made that decision? And are these assumptions still valid? Is it time to reflect on some of these things and perhaps do things differently, right? So documenting the way that you got to make a decision is very important there as well. Just mentioned fire drills, right? Practice. When you have a procedure, when you have something, practice it, right? Bigger companies will insist that it happens. They do that two times a year, 4 times a year, something like that. They'll do tabletop drills where you basically just get everybody in a room and read the procedure, and so that we can say, oh yeah, that's not true anymore. So let's update that to actually doing an actual fire drill, right? Where you say, okay, we're taking this server down, right? It's and of course you wouldn't do that without involving the business, but doing an actual fire drill where everything gets practiced and everything gets done for real is equally important. At the most basic level, and you've heard this 100 times, and nobody does it well enough, including myself, is at the core, at the basic level, when you do FileMaker backups, test your backups. Right? Once in a while, go grab a backup, open it, move it to your spare server, see if it actually works, right? Or whether you can open those things, because it's really no good having the false sense of security of having backups, only to not have the backups, not have valid backups when you need them, right? So we're coming to the end of this, and I'm coming back to this question that I asked at the beginning. Of everything that we talked about today, I think as FileMaker developers, we need to decide what role we play in that. And again, no judgment. Like if you say, yep, I understand all of that, I'll have none of it, that's just fine. I do think that if we call ourselves consultants, we cannot pretend that we don't know about these things, right? We need to have conversations with clients about this, and the sooner we have them early in the process is better than later in the process, because they have consequences on design, they have consequences on architecture of the infrastructure, all of these things. So define your role a little bit, I would say. Think about that. What role do you want to play? Does that mean that you want to acquire some of these skills? If not, then that's perfectly fine. But do you know where to find those skills? And start the conversation. Reach out to your clients and talk about some of these things. Right? You'll be surprised at how grateful clients are sometimes that somebody reaches out and starts the conversation. Because some of these aspects are things that they have heard about, that they have been thinking about maybe themselves, but maybe they don't have the right vocabulary to think about these things, or they don't have the right structure to guide their thinking in getting to an acceptable end result. So reach out to your clients and have that conversation. So thanks.
Wow, great talk there, Wim. Any questions for Wim?
You covered a lot of ground, Wim. Really good points. I actually recently had a conversation this week about, my role. And, I was very clear that I did not want to be responsible for a number of things, infrastructure backups. I think sometimes we get caught as developers doing, wearing hats that maybe we shouldn't be wearing. And it's actually liberating to say, hey, listen, that is not my department. I'm not good at that. I don't have the high skill set for that. I suffer, as a lot of developers do, from thinking that you can do a lot of things. And if you try really hard, yeah, you can, but it's not easy. And it's not my day-to-day job. So I think you made a really good point that we should, I really like the aspect of consulting, the difference between being a consultant, which is more holistic, and being a developer, which is more specific. And I think if you are going to be a consultant, you do need to take responsibility. If you don't have the skill set, you still have the responsibility. I think that's one of the important points that you were trying to make, is you still need to provide them with, those questions and if you answers for them,
Yeah, thanks, Micah. Absolutely, right? Clarity is kindness in these things, right? And it can give yourself peace of mind too, where you go, and we've been there, where we painted ourselves in a corner by trying to be too good to our clients, right? We go like, yeah, we'll take care of that, or like the first time it fails, we go like, oh yeah, we can fix that for you, that kind of thing, and then you get into that, you touch it, you own it kind of thing, where now it becomes your responsibility. And the client just assumes that you will assume that responsibility and go like, no, that's not what we signed up for, right? And actually, just this morning we had an occurrence of that, where one of our clients, who has a branch in Ireland, called one of our developers in the middle of the night to say, our FileMaker Server is down, and we go like, and we fixed it, but we go like, internally, we need to go to our client and say, we're not a support company, right? Or are we, right? That's like part of the question that we need to ask ourselves. Like, do we even want that? Because if we want that, we have to put in the procedures and the things in place to be able to do that. As Soliant, we say we're not a support company. But now we've identified the problem. We put our finger on it. Okay, now what? As consultants, we do think it's our responsibility to then go to the client and say, okay, this happens. This is where our boundaries are. What do we do with that? And help them, and not just throw it over the fence, but say, okay, let's work towards a solution.
Yeah, you can't just throw it over the fence. I mean, sometimes you're troubleshooting an issue, and you need to use your relationship with Claris. You need to reach out to the community. It's some kind of problem that's difficult. That you need specialized skills to be able to. That's where I think it becomes difficult. I don't even know if there's a broad skill set out there for troubleshooting. We've had a problem with intermittent shutdowns, and it always happens when a backup starts running, and the server seems to use up a lot of memory. And got our logs turned on, all that stuff. But I'm like, yeah, how are we going to solve it? Honestly, this is funny. You'll probably agree, but we just put in a 3 a.m. restart, and we never had the problem. And we're in this heated conversation, and I'm trying to provide the best solution I can for the client. And in the end, I said, you know what, we'd all not like to be on this call anymore. So why don't we just do this? And everybody said, you know what? Okay.
I like that, because it speaks to sort of like what the point I was trying to make with documenting it, right? Like, any outcome is a good outcome if it helps alleviate the problem. And there, like, if you had a conversation about that and that's the documented outcome, then that's perfect, right? Because at any time, anybody 6 months, 6 years down the road, if they're asking like, why are we having this 3 a.m. shutdowns? You can say, here's the documentation. That's how we got to do that. And these are the reasons why. If those reasons are no longer valid, okay, we can rethink that and come up with a different solution. We found that very often we don't document these things. We sort of like just come to an agreement, if you will, and just implement it. And then there's personnel turnover or the circumstances change. And we're like, why do we do that? And then everybody goes like, yeah, we should have written it down as to why we did that.
Yeah, you need to have a ticket. You need to have a change ticket that explains it.
I think there's any number of times when we solve a knotty problem, we worked our way through it. It may have taken days or hours, and then you think, it's fixed, and you walk away and your mind becomes occupied with other things. Time passes and the problem happens again, and you've forgotten how you fixed it the first time. So you have to reinvest all that effort. So yeah, documentation is a good one to help prevent having to do that again, especially in the face of a client. Anything you can do to maintain trust is good.
Of course, when you fixed the issue the first time, you never expected to see it. And when you did fix it, you never expected to see it again. So why bother to take 2 hours to document everything? Because it's not going to happen again. So that sort of thing is just a constant ongoing thing.
Wim, there's a question in the chat from Egbert saying that he was recently in need of looking deeper into the logs, and he wanted to know if there was any FileMaker 12 based helper file to read logs faster or easier than it is now, where you download and unzip and open in the console and things like that. So basically a high-speed log ingester analyzer.
High speed, we use a FileMaker-based tools like that internally. I think some of our blog posts have some of those files available. So they are certainly available. And because it's really just rows of numbers, right? Using FileMaker for that is the way to go. Actually, and maybe we should do a session on that at some point. We use a combination of FileMaker and pivot tables in Excel for some of these things, because it's so darn easy to do that. We ingest it in FileMaker. We do some searches in FileMaker to get to the relevant sets and whatnot, and then from there we just drop the data in Excel, pivot it out, so that we can very quickly, if we're talking about say the top call stats log or something like that, where we can really focus on using the aggregates to say, no, these two tables. Within those tables, these 4 fields, that's what we should prioritize, because that's where most of the resources are getting spent on. The tools like Inspector Pro, Base Elements, FM Perception can help with that a lot too, especially with the top call stats log, right? Because there you need to marry the schema elements that they identify with the actual schema elements, because the top call stats log will give you something like table 134 or something like that, right? So by using one of the leading analysis tools, you can make a little more sense of that as well.
Egbert, did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, well, I was already looking for, and I found the log viewer from Mike Duncan on GitHub. And that is also a nice thing, but I thought it's difficult, or it would be easier to have something which it just, you just open up and fetch the data directly and read that in FileMaker. So I thought you are aware of some tools which are available instead of inventing the wheel again.
Yeah, let's see if I can find one real quickly here. The one that I think is there.
I still can't believe that it's still so difficult from the console to watch the logs from the FileMaker console. Yeah.
So this is one that I think one of our blog posts, probably by Mislav Koz, has this file in there. It's and I can follow up on the FMDiSC channel with where you can find that file. But this is sort of like my go-to, because it has both the top call stats and the server stats.
Yeah.
And we have sort of like, based on our experience, like these are just the raw numbers, right? But which ones are the problematic ones, right? So these will be these two, where the call is bigger than half a second, or where remote calls in progress is higher than 2, right? So it helps with slicing and dicing the data a little better that way. At the end of the day, they're just numbers, right? And these numbers will vary, or the meaning of the numbers will vary by so many factors, like how is the solution designed, where is it deployed on, right? So it's kind of difficult to come up with rules of thumb around a lot of these things, but at least some tools like that definitely help.
Yeah, that would be great. I was already in progress building my own tool from scratch, and while you can find the column titles for the top call stats log, you can't for the event log, at least not in FileMaker help. So that's again something I say documentation. Documentation is all you need. But it would be great if you could share that. It would solve me a lot of, and there is the 3rd or the 5th beer on you on me next time we meet.
Yeah, no problem. Yep. No, I'll make this file available. I have a similar one for the event log that I use. That uses some pre-parsing so that I can weed out script errors or disconnects and look at those things specifically.
That would be great. Thank you very much.
Cool.
Any other questions for Wim?
No, I just wanted to say thank you to Wim and to the other speakers. What a great session.
Yeah, super thorough. All right, well, I guess we could give people some of their day back if we just want to wrap it up here. Anybody have any closing thoughts? Micah?
No, I want to talk to Wim sometime about this whole monolith thing, but
you want to have a throwdown? Monolith versus distributed.
Yeah, that would be a good topic someday.
We could have an arm wrestling session.
I don't know. I used to be one way, now I'm the other.
I just wanted to respond to something Micah said a few minutes ago, saying, a lot of this stuff is really good to know, but, it's not your job. You just want to develop maybe. And I guess I would like it for it to not be my job, but as a solo developer, and especially with small clients, we're the only ones really who know, and are still learning about these things that are important. I mean, even some of my clients, some of them never used to have even their own IT departments, but even those who do, those IT departments often know the bare minimum about, setting up or maintain the FileMaker server. They really don't know anything at all. So I think people and the clients and the IT do really defer to us to make sure that all those things are set up and running correctly. And I like to not think about it too much, not have to deal with it too much. But I think it, as Wim was explaining all those things, it requires some maybe more periodic thought. Like I've started in some years past, once I started moving to Amazon, AWS for my own server, I started deploying more client backups to AWS and for their offsite backups. And, or even if you're using Dropbox, I've started doing a periodic, maybe a quarterly or annual backup checkup, which is actually good for business anyway, to remind clients on a periodic basis, hey, do you want me to go check the backups or maybe delete old ones, those kind of things. And so I have found that putting that into practice has helped, at least in certain sort of the backup maintenance aspect of things, but and checking up on the server and making sure that there's enough room, some of those basic things. I think those are things that some of us, especially solo people, have to maybe should put on our calendars and schedules to do more regularly.
I'll mention one thing. We use something called 24/7. It's like 24x7 monitoring. I think it's part of Zoho, and it's like $10 a month per server. And it's really great. We put that on client servers, and then we know when something's wrong. We know before they know, we're on it.
I'll check that out. Thank you.
Dina, I think what you did is you described the issues that almost all of us have, wherein the client doesn't know necessarily all that much, so it kind of falls on you to know everything. Just a little bit difficult.
It's a little difficult.
We don't have to know everything. We just have to know about everything.
But then, we have to know what we want to do something about, or, if you're...
Yes, and where to get the resources.
And yeah, how to schedule that within all the time that we have developing and doing other consulting.
Well, as you point out, it helps the billable hours.
Agreed.
You raise a great point, though, because there's, depending on the sort of mix of clients you have, there's huge variability between dealing with these small organizations where you're the only doctor they're going to get versus, places with substantial IT resources who are kind of territorial, even like stay out of our way and don't mess with our stuff, and we'll tell you what you're allowed to do. So it really runs the gamut sometimes. Tony,
it sure does. Oh, and it probably comes back a lot to, you know, that issue of dealing with client expectations. And, you know, if we don't talk about it at all, the client may either expect that everything's going smoothly or that we're just taking care of things. But the more we talk with them maybe and put that out on the table, at least we can at least maybe see if we're all on the same page or how we can get there.
Yeah.
Yep. One of the nice side benefits of having these conversations we find often with the smaller clients is that the clients are diluting themselves a little bit into what the exact cost of business is, right? Because they have a server, they sort of assume the happy path, the server is always going to be there, my files are always going to be there, and of course, without being assholes about it, we can help guide them to think about, you're in this business, this is what it takes to have a server, right? Or to have a solution and have to maintain that kind of thing. And these are very rewarding conversations to have because it helps prepare them for something that will almost always happen at some point, right? And it's when it does happen that they then turn around and say, we're so glad that we worked with Dina, right? Because she prepared us for that.
Oh, absolutely. Great case in point.
So, hey, let me jump in and say, email. So we have these conversations with customers. We often like to, in some cases, send an email because sometimes we might have good advice in terms of what a customer should do with backups or what might go wrong with cybersecurity, and an email to memorialize the fact that we did provide advice, and also, using a correspondence generation system to write an email once, maybe improve it over time, so that if we're communicating to X number of customers, we're getting a little bit of leverage there. When things go south, everybody's looking for someone else to blame. So it's nice to be able to at least say, we did give you this advice. Anyway, 2 cents there.
Developer cat just walked behind you, Lynn.
Yes.
About documentation, such a tricky thing. My experience over many, many years, that documentation is so hard to keep up with. Wim, do you have the magic solution or tool that you all have successfully been able, or process even, to manage that documentation, ensuring that between the client and between like you, the consultant, and your group are maintaining it? I mean, it seems to just take human discipline, and I think myself included, it's very hard to be disciplined, or even having the right application consistently over a period of, I mean, as we all know, we have solutions that are decades old. Do you have any insights on how you've successfully managed that with your group?
I couldn't agree with you more. It's probably the most tedious aspect of this all, and it never works exactly like you want. It requires discipline, right? And just like with anything that requires discipline, it just doesn't work. And it's also because it's so tedious, it's the last thing that you'll want to do. So it's the first thing that you'll punt on because you're busy. Like the next phase of the project needs to get going, that kind of thing, right? So the only thing that we found that works is to have these check-in points, sort of like to what Dina was talking about, very similar to that, is if you put a stake in the ground to say every 4 months, we have a meeting scheduled, 2 hours, we'll go through the procedures, right? Because then you're doing it, right? And you're always going to catch things that you probably should have done at the time that you did it, but now at least you have a place to spend some time on when that's done. Doesn't really help you much if something happens before you get to the next check-in point, right? So so that's always that to be aware of. We find that having good project managers that crack the whip is probably the best thing to solve this, because if you don't have discipline, they'll make you.
Chiyoko, the bar that I use is, if I died tonight, will somebody be able to recreate this in my absence?
Step in.
And yeah, can somebody step in and just recreate it without me being there at all? If the answer is no, then that would suggest more documentation needed. If the answer is yes, well, I never actually get to that point because I'm usually more in the need more documentation. But using that as a simple bar, I sort of am immediately able to hone in on what needs to be documented and what doesn't matter. Because the question, if the answer is no, a person would have difficulty, then that immediately tells me what needs to be documented.
That's a great point from you and from Wim.
You know, Chiyoko, I think we pay like $10 a month for the basic Atlassian account, you know, where you get the Jira ticketing and you get the Confluence. And we just use it religiously. We put everything in there. We put tickets in there for all the development work. And then if we have procedures documentation, we put it in Confluence, which is kind of like, you know, blog type or documentation site. And it's really inexpensive. And, you know, then it has a place to live. And you don't have to maintain it. And so.
You could probably even use Slack for that too.
Can you put that in the chat? Or just repeat what you said you use for that?
It's Atlassian, or I can put it in the chat.
Confluence is a great idea though, Micah.
Yeah, I mean, we use Jira more. That's like, we put our everything in tickets. Like if I was making that change, like that reboot thing, it wasn't actually my responsibility. So I didn't have to put a ticket in for it. I probably should have, just to have the documentation on my end, but yeah, and it's very just reasonable price. That's what I mean, if it costs hundreds of dollars a month, it might be a little out of reach for us, but it's like 10 or 20 bucks.
Someone did a presentation for DevCon, and I might be exaggerating, but I think there was like 24 different kinds of documentation. And I think it's worth noting that documentation can range from a popover sitting next to a field so that someone can just look. It can be help tickets with screenshots, Slack communication, emails with words and pictures. The Jira, you know, the wiki is super powerful. So I think there's a multiplicity of ways to do documentation. And there's, of course, the option of not doing it, which I don't recommend.
You know, Mike, I would like to see something where you have documentation where maybe there's a keyword for different features or modules or something like that. And then as you do your Git commits, you tag, you know, either put in the script comment or something like that with that same thing, and then have the documentation actually mine the GitHub repository and say, oh, here are all the evolutions that have happened to this feature. And it sort of becomes a de facto living document, even though you're not sort of consciously maintaining it other than tagging your, you know, maybe put something.
Yeah, I mean, Jira, we use Bitbucket as well, which is our Git repository, and it's all Atlassian. So when we have tickets and we have commits, they actually get tagged. And this is for other code. We're not using it for FileMaker, unfortunately, but you know, we're just not there yet. But for PHP code that we do, when we check it in, it all gets linked together. And we put Jira ticket numbers all over our FileMaker scripts. It's messy, but it sure is nice. You know, when we make pages of scripts, we have those ticket numbers in there, and you can always you can go and look at it and figure out why you did it.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
And you can go in the opposite direction as well. We have in every file, we put an API script that can be called with an FMP URL that will go to the file. We go through the main menu. This I presented to you guys in LA. You go to the file, and then you go to the layout. And if you want, you could go to the records and even restore found set. So if you have documentation in a wiki relevant to screens, you can say, and here's the screen of which we are speaking. FMP URL for the win.
And I would highly caution against having reliance on third parties, because you never know when a site is going to disappear and you lose everything. As far as anything important goes, get a local copy. Anything other than that is taking a chance as far as I'm concerned.
Which is why I like text files.
Absolutely. And I'm thinking back to what Lynn said. That struck at me immediately, because in almost any installation I do of anything of any kind, I'm going to have some document of how did I do it, or emergency recover, or my notes for how to do this next time. And it will always start off as a blank page, and it will start getting filled in, perhaps with references to some third-party site, you know, check your job tickets, check this, check that, and then slowly over time, incorporate everything into a single document. And over time, then the emergency recover or documentation, which could be the same thing, gets to be more robust. So it starts off very weak, but just gets stronger over time. And then it starts becoming much easier to determine, do I need to add this into the documentation? And I think back, you know, Micah mentioned job tickets several times now in the conversation. One thing that happens with job tickets is it can get, something important can get lost really easy. Now, if you use keywords, that can be a boon to it. Depending on any individual structure, there might be many job tickets, only one or two of which is of long-term importance. But it's just a matter of, I guess, taking care of it over time, making sure that things don't get lost. And if anything is important, even if you do a lot of job tickets where there might be something that could get lost once every month or 2 months or some periodic time, go through and say, is there anything in here that's really important, and everything else is just simply transactional, and then drag out the important stuff and make sure it's well documented. That's all.
There's another kind of documentation that just occurred to me. That's sort of a skill I've developed over the years, which is when something is going wrong, documenting what you did and what the response was. And it's very easy when your hair is on fire and, you know, people are yelling and all of that's going on, just to, you know, try to deal with things as quickly as possible. But I found that it's extremely helpful to take the time and document everything you did and what the response was or what the reaction was. Because when you're looking at it afterwards, you know, you don't remember, oh, wait, did we restart the server and then copy the file to that server? And then, you know, all the things, do we restart the admin console? You don't remember what order you did. You don't even necessarily remember everything you did do. But taking the time to document step by step what's happening during a crisis, I find is incredibly valuable and just a really good sort of habit to build. Like the first thing I do when an emergency call comes in is pop open a BB edit window and just start making notes of everything that's happening as it's happening.
JR, you just described me to a T. Open up an empty BB edit file and start typing stuff. It's exactly what I do.
Yep.
We are running some kind of open topic list for every application we are running for customers. And this is synchronized with our central CRM system. So every time there's a feature request, there's a bug request, or there's some kind of communication with the customer, then it's a topic in this list. And this is done with a great tool, which is called FileMaker. So everything that's done inside of the company, outside of the company, if you're doing build work, or if it's just a bug fixing or something like that, everything is done in there. So every end of the month, we can do our billing from there. The customer knows what was going on, and if they have a feature request, the numbers that we are going to bill them right in there. So it's everything that's happening with our applications is in this single application.
Yeah, FileMaker makes a good help ticket system with all the get functions and the design functions, and also integrate with Slack and or Jira and or whatever, integrate all over. But start with the get functions. What layout was it submitted from? What file? Who submitted it? What was their privilege set? There's like 1,000 get functions. There's not really 1,000.
All right, why don't we wrap it up here? Wim, thanks a ton. That was a great presentation, super thorough. I'd also like to thank all the other presenters who contributed to the Day of Resilience. Fun topic, and I would like to see that Micah Wim throwdown in the future. I think that would be a fun one.
Yes, it would.
I'll go get buffed up, Matt.
Yeah.
All right.
Oh, you have strong opinions about it. That's good. I like that.
I'm going to stop the recording, but we can continue to chat here.